And so for folks who have not, were not able to participate from the board on Thursday evening, we had a large gathering of particular community members to talk about plans for school reopening. And so that larger group consisted of board members, administrators, teachers, faculty, and staff, community members, parents, students, municipal officials, police officials. And so we really ran the gamut. A number of parents with specific medical backgrounds as well, representatives from Center State Hospital. And we had a session where I'm gonna present a very similar presentation this evening that just goes through a number of the options that we're considering for school reopening to update the community. Before I get there, just a quick update of where we've been. Obviously the schools were closed on March 13th here in the Freehold Regional High School District. Most of us at that point in time thought it would be for a few weeks. Obviously, with the COVID-19 crisis, it's been extended. I want to first and foremost thank my faculty and staff here, my teachers, my administrative team. They've been awesome through this. I think we were positioned very strongly to pivot readily with the use of Google Classroom and other tools. I think that the faculty and staff have been incredibly generous with their time above and beyond through all of this. This was no easy feat. This is a global pandemic. Schools have never been closed like this. I'm proud of the folks in this district that continued teaching and learning through all of this. We also, as a school district, I think it's important to understand we continued to feed hundreds of students throughout this crisis. We deployed approximately 500 Chromebooks to families in need. Oftentimes that need shifted. Unfortunately, we have a lot of family members in this district that were directly impacted by the COVID-19 crisis, whether that was the virus itself, whether that was losing their job, and we know that this was a very difficult time for all of our school community. So I'm thankful and appreciative that I work in a wonderful place with a wonderful board, wonderful faculty and staff, wonderful administrative team, and terrific communities. And so we pushed through. And we're up to our virtual graduation this Wednesday, and then an in-person graduation yet to be determined, though it does look like the governor is going to lift some of those restrictions for outdoor gatherings up to 500. And so we're excited for what the future holds. At this point, we are really directing our focus and our attention to what the fall may look like come September. We know that there are a tremendous number of unknowns at this point in time, and I'll talk about some of those and some of the considerations. And then what I'll do is open it up for the board members to ask any questions. But what I would say to any of the board members as I go through this, if you have any particular questions, please just unmute yourself and let me know. And I'll be happy to answer the questions as we go to the best of my knowledge. Which brings me to the other point that we are still awaiting specific state guidance for what the reopening might look like. And we know from other states, particularly, for instance, Bucks County just introduced their reopening plan in Pennsylvania this morning. We anticipate that within the next couple of days that the governor's office and the Department of Education here in New Jersey will release our guidelines that we will work off of. But we know that we couldn't wait. And so for the past several weeks, we've been working very, very diligently on scoping out what we need to plan for in order to be best prepared for the fall. And so Mr. Dillon, if you can transition to the next slide. We could transition to the next slide, Mr. Dillon. Thank you. So the major bucket areas in which we're looking at our commitments here, understanding what this looks like. So at the base of everything is obviously health and safety, understanding that we need to meet those thresholds and comply with whatever the expectations may be from from the state at that point in time to provide a safe and healthy environment for our students, for our faculty and staff, and obviously to protect the larger community in that. And looking at the whole child, we understand that kids that are coming of age and in our school systems at this point in time, in this moment in history, are being exposed to a lot. You have the COVID-19 crisis. You have the racial crisis that's happening in the country. We understand that September has to look differently for a number of these students for transition's sake. And looking at all of the social and emotional needs of the children that we serve is going to be a critical component of what we do in the fall, in particular during that first 30 days or so back once the schools return. But we're putting a lot of plans in place at this point in time for that transition, and I'll talk through that a little bit later in the presentation. The final commitment is around student growth and learning and understanding what does teaching and learning look like in the fall, given the context of what the environment is that we must work within, right? And so that's an important consideration, and I'll talk about those models first if we could transition to the next slide. So 3 real possibilities at this point in time. The optimum is obviously schools are fully open back in, and we're able to engage in our schooling and in the schoolhouse as we have traditionally been able to do. The second consideration is the schools are in some sort of hybrid mix. What that means is some combination of in-person and remote. And then finally, given the conditions and what they may or may not warrant, schools being fully remote. As far as we're concerned, as an organization, the most difficult of these 3 models will be the hybrid model to manage. And so we know that our schedule has to look very different. We are beginning the process of starting to mock up, potential schedules at this point in time. And those schedules will be built off of, depending on what the criteria is for social distancing and what's allowed in the school. So it may be at 20% capacity, it may be at 50% capacity, or it may be a little bit higher than that. But we know that schooling in the fall is going to look a little bit differently than what it did at the end of the year if we are in some sort of hybrid model. The schools, the school system, the Frill Regional High School District, we anticipate utilizing what's known as a much more synchronous model. We were very much asynchronous. So asynchronous means sort of anytime, anywhere, and that's how we approach the spring. But it's very different to end a school year and transition to that than it is to open a school year, particularly with almost 3,000 ninth graders that have never stepped foot in our buildings before. And so we know that that hybrid model, if that's the pathway we have to move down, will be much more synchronous than the model in which we have utilized in the spring. Obviously, a host of unknown questions around what classroom setups even look like. Interestingly, this morning, the Bucks County model had social distancing in the classrooms at 3 feet, had busing to 2 to a row as long as they wore a mask. I'm not certain, obviously New Jersey has been much more hard hit by the COVID-19 virus than Pennsylvania at this point in time. And so I'm not sure what the guidance will be for New Jersey. We are working up models at this point in time as if it will be 6 foot of social distancing, 6 feet of social distancing, and we will pivot if we need to. But these are the 3 potential options in the fall and what they may include. We are equipping our classrooms, every classroom in the district, with a webcam at this point in time. We understand that in all of this, if there is no vaccine, we know that there will be a number of students and staff with pre-existing conditions that will make it impossible for them to return. And we also anticipate, without a vaccine, that there will be a number of community members who will not send their children back to school directly. And the state guidance on how to address that will will all be important guidance for us to make a decision off of in terms of what our school day will look like. So what we anticipate doing is really diving into that over the next couple of weeks. I did invite the larger community as a sounding board to a subsequent session in late July, and then we will pull them together in late August as well. I'm forming a scheduling committee to really dive into the nuances of this. We've broad stroked it to this point. We know that once we get that final guidance for September, we do understand that that may change, but we feel really confident we're putting a team together to build schedules out from whatever that guidance might be. So if you could go to the next slide, Mr. Dillon. So a couple things that we're looking at from a student support and the whole child end. The transition to ninth grade is traditionally the most difficult transition in the K-12 spectrum for students, absent a global pandemic, absent the racial unrest that's happening across the country. So we know that we need to develop tools to transition those ninth graders. They're not physically in the building. We are looking at a whole host of ways in which we can engage them, and most importantly, start to build community at the start of the school year. And so we're working through a very specific program. If it has to be virtual for ninth graders, we will utilize that. And I should say that, we're really iterating off of our summer programs and how we do this. Our summer boot camp for college applications has been remote. All of our summer programs for ESY, for original credit, for the Advanced Placement Summer Bridge program, they're all remote as well. And we're working with the faculty and staff in delivering those and learning from that as we go as preparation for September. We also know that to give folks a sense of scale again, there are approximately a little over 1,000 individuals within our system that qualify for free and/or reduced lunch. So we know that nutrition and meal services will be a critical component to whatever we do in the fall. Obviously, if schools are closed, there are a number of students in our system that are very much school dependent for meals and the such, and we're working with what that looks like. Utilizing our school nurses have been really valuable in providing input throughout all of this. And we've met with them, Mr. Dillon's met with them pretty much on a weekly basis. So they've been an important cog in what we're looking to do. And then obviously the counseling component of this, our guidance staff, our student assistance counselors, how we are supporting our students across the spectrum here with that start to the school year, we know has to be work that we're going to dive into on those first 30 days. We've done a very, very strong job of, you can mute whoever's making noise. I think that our at-risk students are students that are school fragile, and we are really, we've done a terrific job of supporting them and identifying them throughout this. Mr. Shaw, if you could stop the recording because this is getting playback and I'm hearing the presentation. So please stop recording at this point in time. Thank you. So we've identified individual students across the system in really remarkable ways with a lot of adults along the way as the touchstones to understanding that those students were either not engaged for a reason, struggling in the remote environment, and we've continued to work with them, and we'll continue to build off of that database that we've really put together in the spring with the students who have been in our system already. Obviously, the ninth graders need their own transition. And making sure that our kids have access to Chromebooks and Wi-Fi. I was very pleased with how we were able to distribute Chromebooks in the spring. And we were able to provide Wi-Fi access through working with some phone providers for students that didn't have Wi-Fi at home. And it was from the time we shut our doors on March 13th, it was within the next week or so where we made sure we had every single student connected in this district. And When you're loaning out almost 500 Chromebooks and you have a number of students without Wi-Fi access at home, the way in which we were able to turn that around and how quickly we were is something I was very proud about. So we know that that individual attention is going to be incredibly important at the start of the school year, and we're rethinking those first 30 days of school. Obviously, the academics have to commence, but there's a whole lot of community building that also needs to take place. So, Mr. Dillon, if you could transition to the next slide. From a health and safety standpoint, some of the things we're looking at, and it's up on the screen here. We're not sure whether we'll be mandated to screen for temperatures or not. We are prepared to do so. We've purchased and in the process of finalizing the purchase in some places the necessary equipment to do that. Our nurses were all trained through Johns Hopkins program around contact tracing. And so we have a base. If that is part of the plan, we're prepared for that. Face coverings and masks, that we've ordered, a great deal of masks to be prepared to provide if we need to. Our physical spaces, we've mapped out every single room in each of our high schools at this point in time. We know the square footage of each room. We know what the capacity is. We've changed out all of our air filters and our filtration systems. There were some good questions from the community forum around some of our rooms that don't have windows or might be enclosed in some other ways. And we're making sure, A, that we double check all those ventilation systems, and B, if there's something there that's not optimum to manage, to relocate those classrooms as well if need be. We are identifying our large group areas for which we could repurpose to classrooms, and then identifying what kinds of physical equipment needs to be there, whether that's some kind of plexiglass or the such that you may have seen at your local deli. We're working on that equipment as well. We are part of, I'm proud to say, we started a cooperative through the county. I'll be down at the Monmouth County Sheriff's Office on this Thursday of this week. We're distributing face masks, gowns, and some other equipment to all of the districts in Monmouth County. One of the things that we had requested at the start of this is that if every school district is going to be in the process of purchasing personal protective equipment, PPE, we should be doing that in a collaborative manner to most effectively purchase that equipment. We are putting hand sanitizer stations in every single classroom, in the process of making all of our bathrooms touch-free so that they're all motion activated and such. And then developing specific protocols. And again, we will follow the state guidance when it's finalized, but around what happens when you have a student or a staff who may be exhibiting symptoms, may have been exposed, and that might be an isolation room. We've repurposed our nursing offices at this point in time to provide an isolation space if that's needed. And then obviously we'll be following all those protocols before any student or staff member is able to return. We do also anticipate, we do know that we have faculty and staff as well as students with pre-existing medical conditions, and we'll work through the state guidance to make sure that we protect the safety of those individuals as well. Mr. Dillon, if you can go to the next slide. So a couple just big chunk movements that we're looking at, obviously transportation, so from the start of the day when a student is picked up, and for us, that's, you have somewhere around 8,000 students that are eligible for busing. And that's a serious process for us, obviously, if we will follow the state guidelines on the busing. Not sure what they will look like, but to give the board a sense of scale, if you have a 54 passenger bus, you're looking at anywhere between 12 and 15 or so students if you're socially distant. A lot of our bus runs are actually, vans. They're not the 54 passenger bus, so that's something to consider as well. Again, the Bucks County guidance that came out today talked about 3 foot and 2 to a row on each bus with face masks. For us, there's no way that we could make 4 and 5 bus runs. It's just financially not even possible. We had looked at moving our high schools to the same time several years ago, and it was a $5 or $6 million cost to do that. And so running multiple bus runs is not an option. What that looks like from the day to day, what I'm seeing, a lot of the states that are ahead of us in providing guidance have really put that onus on parents to verify that they've checked their student in the morning. We'll see what that looks like once that guidance comes out, but obviously we're preparing to work through that. We also know that when you enter school, that's going to have to be controlled. We're purchasing large temperature screens if needed, where kids would walk through and be able to move through in a very quick manner. We're going to set up canopies outside of each of the 6 high schools for weather, and we'll be prepared for students entering school. The movement in school, we know we are going to use signage and the such and repurpose our hallways to be one-way hallways, one-way stairwells, stagger our bell schedules from one section of the building to the next. And again, we don't know what the numbers will look like on a given school day, but we do know that we're going to have to control the movement within the building as well. Elementary schools, might have it a bit easier on that because you may have a student who's in a classroom with a particular teacher, but they're there for all their core subjects. In high school, it's a little bit different. Students move for their core subjects, whether that is movement of faculty and staff and students remaining in place, we're not sure, but it's not clean like elementary schools. So you may have 15 students that are in a math class, but they all have different English classes. And so the movement in school is something that we're going to spend a great deal of time on once we know what our schedule is going to look like that we're going to build out. And then obviously exiting school in a safe manner is just as important as how we enter the school day. And so we'll control that with a staggered release as well. Traditionally now the buses line up, kids sort of mill around, get on their buses and go. And we know that that's not going to be possible in the fall. So we're building out systems and structures to ensure that that's done safely. As far as like extracurriculars and such, the NJSIA put out guidance that, some sort of modified practices can begin on July 13th. I'm not certain that we're going to do that here in the Friel Regional High School District. We're going to take a deep look at that. Right now our buildings are closed and we're not prepared to accommodate socially distanced students at this point in time. That doesn't mean it doesn't change before July 13th. But as we sit today, we're gonna take a little deeper look at what that may look like for activities. What that looks like for the fall is anybody's guess. There is a sort of hierarchy of risk of sports and athletics, and you have things like the play and band performances and all that. So all of those things need to be thought through and managed with whatever the final state guidance is. And then we also have plans in place for unexpected short-term closures. And so if the virus peaks again, if there's an increase in numbers and we know that suddenly we need to close the doors for 2 weeks, we will transition to remote learning and we'll have a plan in place for that as well. So this is what's going to consume us over this summer as we head to the fall. This is what we've really turned our attention to at this point in time. And this is why it's become critical for us to at least know what that guidance is from the state so that we can begin to not spend wasted energy on scenarios that will never come to be, rather focus on whatever that scenario for the fall will be, understanding that that could shift at any moment in time. And so when I delivered this presentation to the community group, there were a lot of questions around standardized assessments, SATs, ACTs, and the such. College Board was looking to do some sort of on-site testing in August and September. We would not approve that here at this point in time. I'm not going to, before I open our doors in September, I'm not going to open our doors prior to that for hundreds of kids to take a test and embark on the management of that. It's just not safe. And so we won't be a host site. I'm not sure where the College Board will pivot off of that. I would anticipate that most high schools would probably land in the same decision-making matrix that we're landing with it, saying that it's just not feasible at this point in time. We'll see where that goes. Obviously, universities have lifted their testing requirements all the way through to the class of 2021 in many cases. And obviously there were no state assessments this year. They were all canceled. So we'll see what that may look like next year.